The flower stitch foot is probably the most unusual of all the presser feet and has very little practical value. It's all about the fun. Rarely will you ever get the same results twice, and even the most basic sewing machine will give results just as fancy as the top-of-the-line model. As the name implies, the flower stitch foot generates circles of stitches, often resembling flowers, but also makes rings, circles, stars, and even eyelets. Sizes are fully variable from about 1/4 inch to 1 inch in size. Basic utility stitches are transformed from humble, practical looks to beautiful embellishments, with decorative threads and even twin needles mixed with different stitches in different sizes and combinations. The looks are endless. The flower stitch foot is available only in a low shank version. It consists of a large clear ring base with foam rubber on the underside. The ring spins via a ratcheting mechanism as you sew and is actuated by a driver arm on the right side that goes over the needle clamp screw. An adjustment screw on the back left allows you to slide the base from left to right, which makes for circles of various sizes. To attach, slide the foot clamp around the presser bar while placing the driver arm over the needle clamp screw and securely tighten the presser foot screw. If your machine has the style of built-in dual feed mechanism shown, you may need to make a slight adjustment to the driver arm so that it does not interfere with the bracket supporting the built-in dual feed. Install the foot and check to see if the driver arm and the dual feed bracket are in each other's way. This may not always be the case, as the driver arm of the flower stitch foot isn't necessarily placed in the same position on each foot. If they are interfering, remove the foot and gently bend the driver arm to the right about 1/4 inch. The driver arm is of soft metal and will bend quite easily without breaking. Place the flower stitch foot back on your machine and check the clearance now. Walk the hand wheel through a couple of stitches to ensure all is clear, and you are now ready to sew with your flower stitch foot. The flower stitch foot does the transporting of the fabric, so your feed dogs must be lowered. If your machine uses a feed cover plate instead of lowering the feed, set your stitch length to 0 and do not use the feed cover plate, as its raised platform will interfere with the turning of the fabric. Reduce the upper thread tension to a looser setting as you would for any decorative stitch sewing. Machine embroidery thread is recommended, but you can also use all-purpose thread. A stabilizer is necessary to use under most fabrics. Stabilizer keeps the fabric from puckering and ensures the stitches lie flat and look professional. One type of stabilizer that works well for this type of work is Hdsd's fusible polymesh. This lightweight fabric-like stabilizer is ironed to the back of the fabric and provides lightweight support after you are done sewing, as the excess is trimmed off, leaving the embroidery supported throughout the life of the item. This stabilizer is ideal for lightweight fabrics and may also be used in conjunction with a soft tearaway stabilizer. A second kind of fusible stabilizer is Sulky's Totally Stable. This paper-like stabilizer is pressed on the fabric wrong side and is torn away when finished. It is great for less stable fabrics that stretch and bow out of shape when sewing, like polar fleece or knits. Again, you can use a soft tearaway in combination if you need more support. The third stabilizer recommendation is Hdsd's Ultra Clean and Tear Stabilizer. Our favorite stabilizer, this one is firm, but soft and very fibrous, so it tears away easily and the remaining disintegrates after multiple washings. This stabilizer is ideal for firmly woven fabrics and has a second layer with the fusible stabilizers previously mentioned. After stabilizing your fabric and threading your sewing machine, you are almost ready to sew. Do take the time to play with your flower stitch foot on scraps of fabric so that you can understand how the foot operates and the results you get with different stitches. Basic utility stitches such as the zigzag stitch, the serpentine stitch, the blind hem stitch, overlock stitch, and universal stitch are ideal for use with a flower stitch foot. Complex stitches are not going to give you good results, but we have found a couple of decorative stitches that surprised us. Stitches to try are the zigzag stitch, overlock stitch, the serpentine stitch, the blind hem stitch, universal stitch, and 2 simple decorative stitches that worked well. But experiment with all of the basic stitches your machine can do. Pick a stitch and play around with it. Make it wider, make it narrower. Mirror image the stitch if your machine can do this. Remember, the feed dogs are down, so stitch length is irrelevant. Try the stitch on the small setting of the foot. Try the stitch on the large setting. When you find something you really like, write it down. You will probably never be able to duplicate it exactly, so note the stitch number, stitch width, flower stitch foot size, mirror image, etc. Here is the scrap we started off with. It's not meant to be pretty, it's your palette of available options. Now you're really ready to sew. Place the stabilized fabric under the flower stitch foot and lower the foot. Select your stitch and begin to sew slowly. Sew a few stitches and then stop to cut the thread tails. As you stitch, the flower stitch foot travels in a clockwise motion, spinning the fabric as it sews. Now is a good time to notice that smaller fabric pieces are much easier to embellish than larger ones, as the fabric has to spin freely all the way around as you sew. When you get back to the beginning of the circle, you will need to either lock your threads or leave long thread tails to pull to the back to tie. Stitch over your first few stitches slightly and then stop. If you want to lock your threads by machine, set your machine back to a straight stitch. Next, with the tip of a screwdriver or your scissors, raise the latch that drives the base of the foot. This will keep the foot from moving and allows you to stitch in place for 4 or 5 stitches. Then remove the fabric and cut your threads. For more definition, you can sew around your design 2, 3, or more times to get the look you want. You can also sew with 2 threads or thicker threads. Designs sewn with a flower stitch foot look nice sewn in pairs of a large size for the flower and a smaller size for the center of the flower. Try using the same stitch both times. They look quite different when sewn in different sizes. To sew 2 designs, one within the other so that they are exactly centered, they must be sewn in the same positioning of the foot. We'll explain how. Sew either the outer or inner design. It doesn't matter which is first, and then sew the other. If you want to make them different colors, clip the upper thread, but do not lift the presser foot. Turn the upper thread tension to 0 and remove the upper thread. Thread the machine with a new color and make sure you slip the thread between the tension discs. Turning the tension to 0 will help you to do this, but you still need to floss the thread into the discs. Thread the needle and don't forget to return your tension to the previous setting. Loosen the set screw and slide the base of the foot along with the fabric to the new size and tighten the screw. Then sew the other part of the flower. Due to the off-center design of how the flower stitch foot turns, it is nearly impossible to remove the fabric and then center the foot later over an area and have the design come out centered. Though this process of changing thread colors at every step can be time-consuming, it's really the only way to get the terrific look of 2 color flowers perfectly centered. If you will not be using 2 colors in a 2-part design, skip the rethreading steps, and with the presser foot down, slide the flower stitch foot and fabric to another size and sew. Want to get even more creative? Try a twin needle with a flower stitch foot. Any size can be used, but a 2.0 or 3.0 twin needle works best. As always when working with a twin needle, reduce your stitch width by the width of the twin needle so that you do not break the needle. Why not try the flower stitch foot to make some fringed flowers? Just place a small scrap of fabric you want to be the fringe on top of your main fabric and sew a small circle with a narrow zigzag stitch. Trim the fabric into a circular shape and then with a stiff brush scrub the fabric to fray it, and in seconds you have a 3-dimensional flower. The flower stitch foot does also have a practical side. It can make eyelets. With the flower stitch foot set at the smallest setting and a narrow stitch width of a zigzag stitch, you can easily make eyelets in seconds. After sewing, use an eyelet punch from the buttonhole cutter set to cut open the eyelet. So many exciting possibilities await you with a flower stitch foot, available for all brands of sewing machines in our web store, thecolorfulworldofsewing.com. Let us leave you with some more examples of how to use this foot.